Hey, recently one of you guys, one of you rascals, DM'd me and asked me how I made a living in poetry, which is pretty funny because either these videos of me yakking it up have gotten a lot more convincing, or you guys need some serious clarification because that's just not how I make my living. When I was in grad school, one of the professors there, I guess he felt he made his living in poetry because he was like, it's like, the NBA. There's all these people who want to play pro ball, but, not everyone can be as cool as he was. He was just so proud to kid up for team tenure. And, I hear it on the other side too. People just starting out or ask me, why do you go so hard on amateur poetry? Amateur poems are just for fun. They shouldn't be taken so seriously, Max. And it kind of all begs the question, what is an amateur anyway? And, what's amateur poetry? Are amateurs those who just can't hack it? So I'm not a historian or anything like that. And, I don't know exactly, which terms are used by whom, when, and where. But like rough and ready, I could tell you the etymology of the word amateur comes from the French word amour, right? So it just means it's kind of like a fan. It's someone who loves something, but they're such a big fan of it that they want to do that thing, right? So you can be a tennis fan and watch tennis on TV, or you can be a tennis amateur and, play some tennis too. In the United States, I feel like amateur and professional are often seen as like this dichotomy. You can either be one or the other. And I suppose in sport, that's kind of true. They have standards in sports where it's like you can't be a play in an amateur tournament if you've done certain things. And so, I suppose that makes sense. I mean, Andre Agassi hated tennis. He's pretty open about that, but he was definitely a professional. Sports have things like seeds, drafts, rankings, all that stuff. So you can kind of tell where you're at. But to me, really, the litmus is whether you're making a living off your work. And I really think that is what should be the defining trait of a professional, because profession is job. And, if you think about it, a lot of athletes, very serious, high-level elite athletes are amateurs. A lot of Olympians are amateurs. If you're an Olympian in rowing or wrestling or heptathlon, equestrian, fencing, at least for Americans, they're expected to raise their own money, and, they don't draw a salary for doing that. You're probably going to spend more money going to the Olympics than you're going to make. And that doesn't take anything away from their accomplishments and what they do as these athletes. Just because you don't have your name on a pair of sneakers doesn't mean you're not truly a special athlete and a special talent. And returning to poetry, I think the weird irony to me is that professor who was all like, yeah, I'm a professional, and was talking all this smack about it. He's not really paid to write poetry. I mean, I guess he's paid some, but most of the income that he's earning is through teaching, right? He's basically a coach. It would be like, I coach LeBron James, therefore I'm like LeBron James. Like, no, you're not. I mean, it's great. I mean, there's detracting nothing from being a great coach, but, he just wasn't at that echelon in his career where he could command that type of money just for writing the poems. And there's really very few of those who can do that. I don't even know that his writing poetry covered his car payments. He was an amateur, just like you and just like me. And there's nothing wrong with that. Emily Dickinson was an amateur. Levi was an amateur. Sappho was an amateur. If you think about it, really, you just slow down and stop and think for a moment here. Thinking's hard. They're just, professionals are a little bit of an outlier, right? In the bardic tradition in medieval Ireland, it was a hereditary position and part of the caste system. You were born into it. Okay, that's a professional, right? In the golden age of Rome, poets like Virgil and Horace were members of the imperial court. They were like basically buddies with Emperor Augustus, right? So like, they're professionals in the sense that they came from these aristocratic families, and their patrons, the guys who wrote them the checks, were really close to power. And you could see the same thing like of many of the romantics, the great romantic poets, like, when Coleridge and Wordsworth were writing their lyrical ballads, they were receiving monies from patrons, from rich gentlemen who had an interest in the arts and probably dabbled in poetry themselves and thought their project was worth supporting. That's what enabled them to do what they did, right? Today, the American system is still somewhat similar, right? It's still kind of this patronage system, just kind of readjusted. Well, set aside the Insta poets. We'll come back to that later. But you could say there's probably somewhere around 50 Academy poets, somewhere in that ballpark. Maybe I'm way off. Maybe it's 150 or 200. But I'm going to say there's probably around 50 major poets in the U.S. who earn the majority of their income. The bulk of their earnings come from fellowships, residencies, and professorships that carry very light teaching obligations. So they're really not teaching that much. The vast preponderance of their time is given to basically working on their books, working on their poems, promoting their poetry, giving readings, traveling, things like that, attending retreats, that type of thing. They might be very, very busy, but they're not necessarily busy teaching per se, right? And I would say that there's really a very small number of poets who are in that category. We're talking like big guns, names like Carl Phillips or Louise Glick or Robert Haas or Ada Limon. They're at all the big retreats, the Yaddos and the Bread Loaves. They sit at all the important foundations, the Guggenheims. They know all the right people, and all the right people want to know them. And I just want to be completely clear. Like, I don't think we should be envious of these people in their life. We can admire it or think that's great. That's up to you. But it's like they're flying a lot on economy, right? A lot of these people, they have difficult marriages or broken marriages. It's hard to make time to have kids, have a normal family life. There's crazy departmental politics. If you do have kids, you have all these missed birthday parties and stuff like that, LeBron James, he also gets paid a little bit better for his regular season inconveniences than these folks. So, it's not that glamorous. Most people, I suppose it's nice to be able to walk around and most people don't recognize you or harass you. So you're kind of a class of celebrity that doesn't carry those downsides of being a celebrity, I suppose. But then you don't really have that much clout either, Now we could move down a tier down from these folks on the cusp who put in all the hustle, who, have written books that are critically well received. They've won some awards. They've done this and that. But they're still really, really busy teaching, and they really don't make that much money. They make a modest salary. That's got to be tough for them. Right. That's a tiny minority of poets in the United States who are, earning a steady salary enough to cover their expenses to live, is itself a pretty phenomenal achievement for a poet. But it's not exactly making it in the sense that we might think, where you can just kind of kick back and write your poetry. And I even feel like a tier down from them, kind of going down to this like adjunct tier. A lot of adjuncts teaching poetry in the United States have incredible credentials. We're talking about poets whose poems have appeared in Best American Poetry, who've won Pushcart prizes, who have first and second and third books out from major, significant indie presses. But they're still kind of living out of the trunk of their 2007 Toyota Corolla. It's just, it's a brutal, cutthroat life, right? And it's this arbitrary distinction that I'm making too. And the difference between amateur and professional in poetry really is totally and completely arbitrary. Amateurs frequently enjoy just enough support and incentive to create great art, even if a lot of that incentive is kind of non-economic. Like, speaking for myself, I'm motivated to pursue things knowing that I can't support myself or my family to do it, but I'm still motivated to try to pursue publication because of the prestige or because of the personal significance it has to me. And if this didn't motivate me, I don't think I would write as well or as often. I wouldn't apply myself in the same way if I didn't see that as a possibility. But that doesn't guarantee that my work is going to be quality, nor does it mean that every amateur is going to respond the same way. And you could look on the other side and say, you could say, well, what if you took money out of the equation? What if you're someone like Rupi Kaur, who has this incredible ability to sell books directly to her interested readers? She's a true professional by any standard. She directly earns money from the act of her writing, and there's really no strings attached to that. But it doesn't really guarantee quality, right? I would kind of say this kind of freedom and discipline, the freedom to pursue things that interest you, and the discipline and the kind of yoking of expectation and of competition are like yin and yang. And great art seems to always unify and transcend these two poles. You need some freedom. I mean, all creative people need some. They need enough slack on the leash to take risks. But you also need discipline. You want a system that demands excellence from you and punishes navel-gazing. And we're all guilty of it. There are very few artists and poets who, if you just give them unlimited resources, they're going to come up with anything that interesting. I mean, it's extremely unusual for that to happen. I believe great poetry can be written by insiders or outsiders. And oftentimes we fetishize outsider art or people coming from the outside, which is also kind of this weird American thing, like, oh, outsiders. And I think it's mostly this false dichotomy. Every artist, every creative person, every poet needs to find out what conditions are essential for their own development. And I would go so far as to say, for most people, most of the time, seeking the center is a natural instinct and probably results in the most production. That motivation to try to move towards the center of creative life in your culture and your society is going to motivate you to impress people, and to try your best, to take calculated risks. But it can also co-opt your center of gravity into its own. And I think that happens when people lose their amateurism. So my advice to you is stay amateur. Stay amateur no matter what happens. And I think being an amateur is a good thing. Thank you.